The space station was buzzing with activity as cadets from various species walked in and out of training rooms, discussing their next missions. Among them was one human cadet, a young man named Ryan, who was eager to prove himself. At just 19 years old, he had been selected for a prestigious military program aimed at strengthening intergalactic alliances. He wasn't like the others. He had a fierce determination that burned deep inside him. But today would be the day that would test not only his resolve, but also his place in the universe. Ryan had always admired the alien forces, the way they moved with precision, the way they commanded respect with just a look. He had trained hard for this moment, to be part of the greatest military alliance ever known. But even he wasn't prepared for what would happen next. General Zorath, the alien commander who led the training program, stood in front of the cadets. His reputation was legendary. He was a warrior who had fought in countless battles, a cold and calculating leader who commanded the respect of every species across the galaxy. Zorath's species, the Vroken, were massive, towering over most of the other races in the galaxy. His skin was a deep, dark blue, and his eyes were piercing, glowing with an intimidating light. His face was hardened by years of war, and his expression was always stern. No one had ever seen him smile. The other cadets were in awe of him, but Ryan felt only nervous excitement. This was the chance of a lifetime, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. As Zorath called out the first group of cadets for a demonstration of their skills, Ryan stepped forward with the others. His heart was pounding in his chest, but he tried to steady his breathing. This was it. This was his chance to prove that humans could be just as strong, just as capable as any of the other species in the galaxy. He glanced around and saw the faces of the other cadets, each one older and more experienced than him, their eyes filled with curiosity and challenge. He tried to ignore the pressure and focused on the task at hand. Zorath's sharp eyes scanned the group of cadets. His gaze passed over the Vroken warriors, the Xelnians, the Tarakis, all the major races of the galaxy. But when his eyes fell on Ryan, they lingered for a moment. Ryan stood taller than most humans, but next to Zorath, he was a mere speck. Zorath's piercing gaze seemed to see right through him. Ryan felt a chill run down his spine. He had never felt so small, so insignificant, in front of anyone before. But he held his ground, meeting the general's gaze with a quiet defiance. He wasn't about to let fear show. The training began, and Ryan did his best to follow the commands. He moved through the exercises with focus, his movements sharp and deliberate. But he could feel Zorath's eyes on him, studying him. It wasn't just the usual scrutiny. There was something more behind that gaze, something that Ryan couldn't quite understand. It was like Zorath was trying to see something beyond his training, something deeper. And that thought made Ryan uncomfortable. The exercises continued, and soon it was time for sparring. Zorath selected the pairings. Ryan's heart skipped a beat when he was called forward. His opponent was another cadet, a massive Vroken warrior, known for his brute strength. The alien's muscles rippled beneath his armor as he stepped into the arena, his cold eyes locked on Ryan. Ryan's hands clenched into fists. This was going to be tough. Zorath stood off to the side, observing the sparring match with his usual impassive expression. As the fight began, the Vroken warrior charged forward with incredible speed, aiming to overpower Ryan with sheer force. Ryan barely had time to react. The alien's fist connected with his shoulder, sending him tumbling to the ground. Pain shot through Ryan's body, but he gritted his teeth and forced himself to his feet. He couldn't let this alien take him down. Not here. Not now. Ryan knew he couldn't match the Vroken's strength, but he had something the alien didn't: agility and quick thinking. He dodged another strike and moved quickly to the side, using his momentum to land a punch to the alien's side. The Vroken growled in pain, clearly surprised that the human had managed to land a blow. Ryan didn't hesitate. He kept moving, dodging the Vroken's heavy punches and striking when he saw an opening. He wasn't winning, but he wasn't losing either. He was holding his own. The fight continued for what felt like an eternity, and Ryan's muscles began to ache. He was tiring, but the Vrokin didn't seem to be slowing down. Zoreth's eyes were fixed on the battle, his expression unreadable. The other cadets around the arena had fallen silent, watching the match with great interest. Ryan knew this was the moment that would define him. He couldn't afford to fail. Finally, in one desperate move, Ryan ducked beneath the Vrokin's swing, and using all his remaining strength, kicked the alien's leg out from under him. The Vrokin stumbled and fell hard to the ground, crashing with a loud thud. Ryan stood over him, chest heaving with exhaustion, but he didn't let his guard down. The Vrokin glared up at him, his face contorted in rage. Ryan didn't know if he had won, but he wasn't backing down. Zoreth stepped forward, breaking the silence. "Enough," he said in a deep, commanding voice. "You've proven something, human." Ryan looked up at Zoreth, his breath still ragged. He didn't know what the general meant by that statement, but he was determined to find out. Zoreth's eyes softened, just for a moment, before his usual cold expression returned. "You've got spirit. I'll give you that." He turned to the Vrokin warrior, who was slowly getting to his feet. "You're lucky, Cadet," Zoreth said. "I thought you would fall much sooner." The Vrokin warrior didn't respond. His pride was too bruised to speak. Ryan's heart raced, but he didn't let the moment overwhelm him. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Zoreth stepped back, his gaze lingering on Ryan for a long moment. "I will be watching you, human. You may be weak now, but I see potential. Don't waste it." As the training session came to a close, Ryan walked back to his quarters, the words of the general echoing in his mind. He had earned Zoreth's respect, but there was still so much more to prove. Ryan knew this was just the beginning of his journey. He had earned the right to stand among the stars, and he wouldn't stop until he had earned his place beside the greatest warriors the galaxy had ever seen. The encounter with General Zoreth had changed everything for Ryan. He had been humiliated, but he had also been acknowledged. He had been challenged, but he had stood firm. And the one thing he knew for sure now was that the galaxy was not ready for what humanity could truly do. His days following the sparring match with the Vrokin warrior were tense for Ryan. His mind kept replaying the events of the fight over and over again. He had managed to surprise his opponent, but what truly caught him off guard was Zoreth's reaction. The general, who was known for his cold demeanor, had actually shown a flicker of respect for him. It was something Ryan hadn't expected, but something he was grateful for. That respect, however, didn't come without its own set of challenges. The next day, during a new round of training exercises, Ryan was paired up with a different opponent, an alien cadet from the Terraki species. The Terraki were known for their agility and speed. Unlike the Vrokin, who relied on strength, the Terraki used their quick movements to outmaneuver their enemies. Ryan wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew he needed to stay sharp. As the exercise began, Ryan quickly realized the Terraki's reputation was well earned. The aliens' movements were like lightning, too fast to track with the naked eye. The Cadet weaved through Ryan's defenses, landing quick jabs that left Ryan gasping for breath. The human Cadet struggled to keep up. His training was good, but it wasn't enough to match the Terraki's speed. The alien danced around him, constantly attacking and retreating, never giving Ryan a chance to land a solid hit. The more Ryan tried to react, the more he found himself off balance, caught in a whirlwind of punches and kicks. His thoughts raced. He needed to find a way to turn the tide, but every time he tried to strike back, the Terraki was already gone, darting out of reach. Ryan's mind began to falter under the pressure. The doubt crept in again, the feeling that maybe he wasn't cut out for this after all. The other cadets were so much better than him. They had the skills, the training, the experience. And here he was, just a human, small, slow, and outmatched. But then, as the Terraki cadet moved in for another quick strike, something inside Ryan clicked. It wasn't about trying to match the alien's speed with his own. It was about using his own strengths, his resilience, and his will to never give up. Ryan took a deep breath and focused. He would have to be patient. He would have to think ahead, anticipate the alien's next move. When the Tereki lunged, Ryan didn't try to dodge or block the attack. Instead, he let the alien's fist pass by him, deliberately allowing it to miss. He shifted his weight, his body moving with purpose, and in the same motion, he grabbed the Tereki's arm and used the alien's momentum against him. The Tereki stumbled forward, thrown off balance by the human's unexpected counter. Ryan didn't hesitate. He spun the alien around and forced him to the ground with a swift maneuver that left the Tereki unable to continue the fight. The arena went silent. Ryan stood over his opponent, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. He had done it. He had won. It wasn't with speed or power. It was with wit, with patience, and with the unyielding determination that burned deep inside him. He had found a way to beat the odds. Zoreth's voice broke the silence. "Impressive," he said, his tone as cold and calculated as always. But this time, there was something else in his words. A hint of approval, perhaps. "You are learning quickly, human, but do not think that your journey is over. There is much more to learn." Ryan nodded, his mind still reeling from the victory. He had done it, but he knew this was only the beginning. He couldn't let his guard down. Not now. Not ever. As the training session ended, the other cadets slowly gathered around, whispering among themselves. Ryan could feel their eyes on him, some filled with admiration, others with skepticism. But he didn't care. For the first time, he felt like he had earned his place among them. Later that evening, as Ryan walked through the corridors of the station, he reflected on the day's events. He had learned an important lesson. It wasn't enough to rely solely on strength or speed. The key to survival in this galaxy was adaptability, the ability to think on your feet, and the will to push forward no matter how tough things got. Ryan had always believed in humanity's potential, but now, after everything he had experienced, he knew that the galaxy was about to learn something crucial. Humans may not have the raw power of the Vroken, or the agility of the Tereki, but they had something that none of the other species could replicate: their unwavering determination. The next morning, as he made his way to the training ground, Ryan felt different, more confident, more ready. The day's training would be brutal, but he was prepared for it. He had learned that the key to success wasn't just about what he could do, it was about what he was willing to do. And he was ready to do whatever it took to prove that humans were not to be underestimated. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. Ryan was no longer the weak human cadet. He was a force to be reckoned with, and he would stop at nothing to prove it. Ryan's training intensified over the next few weeks. He wasn't just facing different alien species anymore. He was facing his own limits, pushing past them in ways he had never imagined. Each day was a battle, but it was a battle that he was determined to win. Zoreth, the Vroken general, continued to oversee the training. While the general's presence remained intimidating, Ryan began to notice something subtle in his eyes. An acknowledgement. Zoreth wasn't just testing him anymore. There was a strange kind of respect there, something Ryan could never have imagined when he first arrived. Despite the harshness of the training and the relentless pressure, Zoreth's words never lost their sharpness. Still, there was a slight shift in the way the general spoke to him, as if Ryan's resilience was slowly earning him the place he had once doubted. Ryan found himself moving differently, his body adapting to the grueling exercises. The other cadets, even the ones who had previously mocked him, were now taking note of his growing skill. The Tereki cadet, who had once overwhelmed him in their first match, now treated him with caution. Ryan had made himself into a threat, not by becoming the fastest, but by becoming the most adaptable. His ability to think on his feet, to adjust mid-fight, was something that even the seasoned warriors of the alien species couldn't ignore. But it wasn't just the physical changes Ryan was experiencing. His mindset had evolved. He no longer felt like the outsider he had once been. Instead, he began to see himself as a part of something greater, a part of the galaxy's most dangerous and skilled forces. The training had turned from a simple test of endurance into a rite of passage. Every battle, every sparring match, was a step toward becoming more than just a cadet. It was his chance to prove that humanity could stand toe-to-toe with the galaxy's most formidable species. One afternoon, as Ryan was recovering from a particularly grueling session with the Froken, he overheard a conversation between two higher-ranking officers. They were discussing the recent shift in attitude toward humans. The first officer, a tall alien with shimmering skin, was skeptical. "They're good fighters, sure, but do you really think humans can contribute to the military effort in the way we need? They're too unpredictable." The second officer, a quiet and observant Taraki, countered. "That's exactly why they're valuable. Their unpredictability is a strength. In the heat of battle, when everything is falling apart, the last thing you want is a soldier who follows the rules without question. Humans think on their feet. They don't just react, they act. That's something we could use in the field." Ryan's heart raced as he listened. For the first time, he wasn't just a human among aliens. He was an asset. His unpredictability was seen as a strength. The thought of it made him feel more alive than he ever had before. He wasn't just fighting for his survival anymore. He was fighting for humanity's place in the galaxy. But the tension in the air was palpable. Not everyone shared the same optimism about human soldiers. The higher-ups might be starting to see value in Ryan and his fellow cadets, but there were still plenty who doubted humanity's place in this vast, dangerous galaxy. Ryan knew that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. The more he learned, the more he understood the stakes. This wasn't just about individual training. It was about earning a seat at the table of galactic powers. He had to prove to everyone that humanity wasn't just capable of surviving. They were capable of leading. Then, everything changed. The call came in late one evening, while Ryan was finishing his routine workout. It was a direct message from the Galactic High Command. The message was brief, but it carried weight. The human cadets were to be deployed for their first real mission. Zoreth stood before them in the training hall, his face unreadable as always. "This mission will test everything you've learned," he said. "You will face an enemy unlike any you've trained for. The battle will be brutal, and your survival will depend on how well you adapt." Ryan's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. This was the moment everything had been building toward. No more drills. No more practice. They were being sent into real combat, and there was no turning back. The briefing was rushed but clear. A nearby colony, on the edge of a neutral sector, had been attacked by a hostile force. The invaders were a race known as the Korkath, a brutal species known for their merciless tactics. The Korkath had been a growing threat for years, but they had kept to their own territories. Now, they had struck outside of their borders, and the galaxy needed to respond. Ryan's task, along with the rest of his unit, was to infiltrate the enemy's stronghold, assess their numbers, and determine how best to counter their assault. It was a dangerous mission, and the odds were stacked against them. But Ryan didn't feel fear. Instead, he felt a sharp clarity. This was what he had been training for. This was where he would prove everything to the galaxy. The next few hours were a blur of preparation. Ryan gathered his gear, checked his weapons, and ran through the mission parameters in his mind. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This wasn't just about survival. This was about showing the galaxy that humanity could hold its own, even in the darkest of times. The shuttle ride to the Korkath stronghold was silent. Each cadet was lost in their own thoughts, preparing mentally for the battle ahead. Ryan's thoughts, however, kept returning to the same point, his place in all of this. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for his entire species, for Earth, and for every human who had ever been underestimated. This was his chance to prove that humans weren't weak, that they weren't inferior. The shuttle touched down on the rocky surface of the Korkath stronghold. As the hatch opened, Ryan felt the tension in the air. This was real now. There was no going back. He looked around at the other cadets, who were steeling themselves for what lay ahead. This was no longer a training exercise. It was life or death. And as Ryan stepped out onto the barren surface, a new resolve settled within him. This was his time. The galaxy would soon learn that humanity was not something to be dismissed. They would learn to fear the humans who refused to back down. The ground trembled beneath their feet as Ryan and his unit moved cautiously through the Korkath stronghold. The place was a fortress, dark, imposing, and built with cold, jagged materials that reflected the brutal nature of its inhabitants. Every step Ryan took felt heavier, the reality of the mission pressing down on him. He wasn't just a cadet anymore. This was real combat, the kind of mission he had trained for. As they moved deeper into the compound, the eerie silence of the surroundings made Ryan feel even more on edge. The air was thick with the tension of imminent danger. Each corner they turned could hide an enemy. Every shadow could be a trap. But Ryan focused, just like he had been taught. Don't think about what could happen, he reminded himself. Focus on what's in front of you. The Korkath, known for their unpredictable and violent tactics, had launched an ambush on the neighboring colony, slaughtering civilians without mercy. It wasn't just an attack, it was a statement. The Korkath were making their presence known in a galaxy that had, until now, feared their reputation. Ryan's mission was clear: infiltrate the enemy's stronghold, gather intel on their forces, and find a way to stop them before they could launch a larger-scale assault. They moved through the narrow corridors of the fortress, each member of the unit scanning for any signs of the enemy. Ryan's heart raced, his senses heightened. He had never been this close to a real enemy before, and the weight of that truth settled in his chest. This was a test, not just of his training, but of his courage. He had to prove himself to his fellow cadets and to the galaxy that humanity wasn't just a footnote in this vast universe. They were capable of standing toe-to-toe with the greatest threats the galaxy had ever seen. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy and echoing down the hall. Ryan's body tensed, every muscle ready for action. He motioned for his unit to halt, and they quickly pressed against the walls, holding their breath as the footsteps drew closer. The Korkath soldiers, large and heavily armored, were marching in their direction. Ryan's mind raced. They couldn't afford to be spotted. They needed to wait for the right moment to strike. The soldiers passed by, oblivious to the humans lurking just around the corner. Ryan's heart pounded in his ears as he watched them disappear into the distance. They had avoided detection, but it had been close. Too close. They couldn't afford another mistake like that. After waiting a few moments, Ryan motioned for the team to move. They continued deeper into the fortress, careful to avoid any further patrols. Ryan's thoughts kept drifting back to the Cadet training exercises, the endless drills, the brutal sparring matches. He had been pushed beyond his limits. The intensity of it all had built him into someone new. And now, here he was, standing on the precipice of something far greater than he had ever imagined. The deeper they went, the more Ryan felt the weight of his mission. The Korkath weren't just savage. They were calculating, ruthless. They knew how to fight, how to win. They didn't leave anything to chance, and that made them even more dangerous. Ryan couldn't help but wonder how they had taken down the colony so quickly. How had they gotten in without being detected? These were the questions that needed answers. As they neared the central chamber, Ryan could feel the tension in the air becoming almost suffocating. This was it. This was the heart of the Korkath fortress. He could almost feel the presence of the enemy in the air, thick with hostility and raw aggression. There was no going back now. Ryan nodded to his team, signaling that they were ready. It was time to breach the central chamber and gather the intel they needed. They moved quickly but quietly, approaching the massive reinforced doors of the chamber. The sounds of Korkath soldiers inside echoed through the walls, a reminder of just how dangerous this mission was. With a deep breath, Ryan pushed open the door. The sight that met him was worse than he had expected. Inside the chamber, Korkath soldiers were busy planning their next move, surrounded by high-tech weaponry and data consoles. It was clear that the Korkath weren't just a threat to the colony anymore. They were preparing for something much bigger. Ryan's heart sank as he realized the magnitude of what they were facing. He motioned to his team, signaling for them to spread out and gather as much intel as possible. There was no time to waste. The galaxy's survival could depend on what they learned here. Ryan moved to one of the consoles, his fingers flying across the controls as he hacked into the Korkath system. His hands trembled slightly from the pressure, but he forced himself to focus. This was the moment. He had to get the data. Just as Ryan managed to access critical files, an alarm sounded. The Korkath had detected their presence. "Move," Ryan shouted, his voice sharp. The team sprang into action, racing for the exit. The sound of pounding feet echoed behind them as the Korkath soldiers closed in, furious at the intrusion. Ryan could hear the shouts of the enemy as they rushed to intercept. As they ran, the tension was unbearable. Every corner they turned brought them closer to their goal, but also closer to being caught. The Korkath were closing in, and Ryan knew they had to make it out fast. But there was a problem. One of the cadets had tripped, falling behind the rest of the group. Without thinking, Ryan turned back. He wasn't going to leave anyone behind. The Korkath were almost upon them, but Ryan didn't hesitate. He grabbed the fallen cadet and helped him up, the two of them sprinting together toward the exit. "Come on," Ryan yelled, urging the cadet forward. They were so close now. With one final burst of speed, they made it outside, just as the Korkath soldiers reached the exit. The shuttle waiting for them was their only escape, and they ran for it, hearts pounding in their chests. As the shuttle doors slammed shut behind them, Ryan let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. They had made it, but there was no time to celebrate. They had the intel they needed, but at what cost? The mission wasn't over. The Korkath threat was far from finished, and Ryan knew that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. The galaxy's most feared enemy was on the move, and it was up to him and his team to stop them. As the shuttle soared into the sky, Ryan's mind was still racing. The Korkath fortress was behind them now, but the images of the battle, the fear, and the chaos haunted his thoughts. The enemy had known they were coming, had been prepared for their intrusion. That meant the Korkath were already one step ahead of them. It wasn't just a mission now. It was survival. They had narrowly escaped, but their victory felt hollow. Ryan sat in the back of the shuttle, staring at the data they had gathered. His fingers hovered over the screen, but for a moment, he couldn't bring himself to look through the files. The weight of their escape, the lives they had risked, the near death of his fellow cadet, all of it pressed down on him. And yet, amidst all the chaos, something stood out. The Korkath had been preparing for a full-scale war. It wasn't just a raid, a simple attack on one colony. This was an invasion. They had been amassing resources, soldiers, and technology in ways that were designed for one thing: total domination. "Ryan," a voice broke through his thoughts. It was Commander Lyra, their leader. Her face was calm, but Ryan could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "We need to analyze the data. Now." Ryan nodded, pulling himself out of his stupor. The mission wasn't over. There was no time for second-guessing or self-doubt. He had to focus. The Korkath were a threat like no other, and humanity needed to know exactly what they were facing. If they were going to stop them, they had to act quickly, decisively. He connected the data to the shuttle's main terminal, and the screen flickered to life. The raw data poured in, streams of encrypted codes, coordinates, and intelligence files. But there was something strange about one of the files. It was marked with an unusual symbol. Ryan's finger hovered over it, curiosity gnawing at him. He clicked on the file, and it took him to a set of coordinates. "These aren't just random locations," Ryan muttered to himself. "These are targets." Commander Lyra leaned over his shoulder, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the screen. "Are you telling me these are planned attacks?" she asked. "Exactly," Ryan replied, tapping the coordinates. "The Korkath aren't just raiding random systems. They're planning to hit strategic locations across the galaxy. They're targeting our supply lines, our military outposts, and even civilian colonies. If we don't stop them, the galaxy will fall into chaos." A sense of urgency filled the shuttle. The others in the crew gathered around, their expressions grim as they realized the full scope of what they had uncovered. The Korkath were organizing a series of coordinated strikes. They weren't just random savages. They were a well-oiled war machine, and humanity was at the center of their target list. Ryan looked up from the screen, his jaw tight with resolve. "We need to warn Command," he said. "We need to send this data before it's too late." The crew quickly moved into action. Lyra directed one of the crew members to transmit the data to the High Command on Earth. It would take hours for the message to reach its destination, but every second counted. The Korkath were out there, lurking in the shadows, ready to strike. And if humanity didn't act fast, the galaxy would soon know nothing but war. As the shuttle continued its journey back to Earth, Ryan felt a growing sense of dread. They had survived their mission, but what awaited them back home was a different kind of fight. The war they were now facing wasn't one they could win with just their training and skills. It was a war that would test every human being in the galaxy, every ally, every soldier, and every civilian. It was going to be a fight for survival, and it was going to cost them everything. Commander Lyra broke the silence, her voice calm but firm. "Ryan, what we've learned today isn't just about the Korkath. It's about humanity's place in this galaxy. They think we're weak, that we're not ready for war. They're about to find out just how wrong they are." Ryan nodded, a cold determination settling in his chest. He had seen the way the Korkath fought, how they slaughtered their enemies with ruthless precision. But what they didn't understand was humanity's resilience. They didn't understand what would happen when the last spark of mercy was snuffed out. The Korkath had made a terrible mistake. Humanity wasn't just going to fight back. They were going to make sure the galaxy would never forget who had stood in the way of their conquest. The Korkath had pushed them too far. Now they would learn that humanity was more than just a target. They were a force to be reckoned with. And this was only the beginning.